Right. So, how important was MAC in helping New York City
It was
recover?
very important. The organization MAC, um, I think it stood for Municipal Assistance Corporation,
Correct.
um, was able to borrow money for the city that the city couldn't have borrowed on its own because it had no credit rating for the city's bonds. And people don't buy bonds, they're junk bonds. People who buy junk bonds are speculators. People who buy municipal bonds are not speculators, normally. So the reason they would buy municipal obligation bonds through MAC, which issued its own bond, is that the city diverted to MAC particular revenue streams. Sales tax, my recollection being the biggest one. So those people knew they would be paid no matter what happened to the city. And then it was important when we got back our rating that we get rid of MAC so that we were no longer dependent on the state, which, if it issued MAC bonds, guaranteed those bonds as well as the revenues that we had, sales tax, and therefore could decide what the amount of our bond sales should be. And we did not want to have an outside authority determine city policy where we could help it. So as soon as the city got back its rating, I told Felix Roten we appreciated what he had done, but we didn't want any more. And we sold our own bonds.
Some people have argued that New York City's welfare programs in the two decades leading up to the fiscal crisis had simply been too large.
True.
Right. And many of the politicians simply did not want to kill those programs.
True.
Right. What were some what were some of the social what was the social environment like in the city that forced or pushed politicians to continue those programs?
Well, firstly, very few of those programs were ever changed because they're not set by the city. They're set by the state, and they are statewide. How much rent you pay, what was the grant of money that you paid, what kind of Medicaid coverage, that's all set by the state. And the benefits, particularly in Medicaid, were far higher than any other state paid. And my recollection, it's many years ago, is that we never really reduced those payments. Never really did, because the state wouldn't do it. Now, what was the attitude in the city? The city would have loved, I was the city in the sense of making those determinations as mayor, and I wanted very much to reduce these things, but I couldn't get it through the state legislature. So we had to do what I could do, which was reduce city expenditures that were discretionary. The expenditures that you're talking about were mandatory.
Many cuts were made to like social and health programs to help bring New York out of the fiscal crisis. How did that change like the social environment of New York?
Well, people who thought we should continue to increase the benefits were very angry with me. that I didn't think we should. And I fought whatever benefits I could. I was not always successful. I was particularly unsuccessful in fighting the benefits of increased pensions that the state legislature imposed on the city to give to city workers. They didn't give the same high benefits to state workers because they had to pay for that. They gave them to city workers because all they had to do was pass the law, but put the payment on the city. So it was very difficult for us. But we did it. We brought the city's budget into balance.
How much federal funding did the city receive? Was federal funding enough? Was it reduced?
When I came in, we believed that the funding from the federal government and the state government were inadequate and not comparable to what many states provided their cities elsewhere in the United States. And our goal was that ultimately the federal government should pay 20% of our total budget and the state government the same, and that the city's responsibility would be to raise revenue for the balance of 60%. I think that ultimately became what in fact happened.
In 1974 or around that time period, the federal government changed the way money was allocated through the community block grant program. What exactly was that program, and how did it affect New
Community
York
block
City?
grant program meant that the federal government would provide dollars to the city government without strings. If they gave you money, but they said you have to use it for A, B, and C, that wasn't helpful to getting the city out of its near bankruptcy position. What the city required was money that it could use the way it wanted and didn't add to the expenditures. If they said, for example, taking the best view, we're giving you $20 million, but you can only use it for education. That didn't help the city in terms of balancing its budget. It merely increased the amount that the city had to spend, because normally speaking, if you got a grant, it was for a particular period, and you added a program for that, and then the federal government 2 or 3 years later didn't give you that grant again. You're left there with a program that now the city has to pay for. So what our efforts was to get the state and the federal government to allocate monies to the city that had no strings attached to it, that we could spend as we thought appropriate. He changed his position and he became supportive. The one who was not supportive to the very end was Bill Proxmire, who was the chairman of the committee. Most people think he helped us, he hurt us. He was against providing assistance, and it was the Republican, Richard Lugar, who took up our cause and was ultimately responsible for getting the legislation of providing the $1,650,000,000 through. As I say once again, peanuts.
What are some of the things that happened during your tenure in office and during the crisis that still affect New York to this day?